You're listening to the Endless Party Radio Show with the Doc on Colossal Radio.
So we have this noontime special feature for you right here on the show. We like to call it the Endless Party Radio Show because for over 3 decades we've been able to make a living out of having a party. And I was talking to this gentleman that we'll introduce you to, that so many of you know what's coming up right now. It is the incomparable Steve Hackett of Genesis and Hall of Famer, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, and knows everybody in the rock and roll world. I'll bet you he has crossed paths with Elton John too, since we just played some Elton John music. But I actually wanted to pick up a little bit of a conversation that Steve and I were having before we went on the air with all of you guys. What a compliment. Steve Hackett, first of all, of Genesis. Welcome to the show, but I can't believe that you would know him. I wouldn't, but my speaking voice sounds like Johnny Cash. I love that.
Sounds like Johnny Cash to me, yeah. I mean, I don't know what us English guys sound like, but yeah, you said it's got that sort of, it's got that quality to it. So,
that's awesome. Well, you know, yeah. I don't know. I lived when Johnny Cash was probably one of those really bad country guys doing those crazy things. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe that's what gave me my voice, all that bad stuff that I did. You know, I don't know.
Maybe that's it, yeah.
It could be.
Maybe that's it, yeah.
Steve Hackett, ladies and gentlemen, and this, I've had many people from the rock and roll country side of things, some of the best of the best on board. This is certainly a highlight for me, having Steve Hackett on board with the show. I don't even know where to begin. I told you I don't lay out all kinds of questions. I have a few, one or two that came in from listeners that we'll get to, but I don't know. Welcome to the show. Where do we start? What's going on? Because you have things that that you're doing with Selling England by the Pound tour.
Yeah. Well, I guess that goes right back to 1973 when that album came out. We, as Genesis, were a young, struggling band, barely able to get a show in the whole of the States, and as we were leaving New York, with no prospect of shows for the next 2 weeks before we hit L.A., John Lennon gave an interview and said to, I think, Scott Muni at WNEW, he said Genesis was one of the bands that he was listening to. So, that was a feather in our cap at that time, and gave us real hope that maybe we were doing something which wasn't too dreadful. That was the thing.
Right.
So, many years later, of course, I'm still intrigued by that, and I wonder what it is he found interesting about us.
Did you ever have that chance to ask him?
No, I never actually met him. I met Paul McCartney and had a little bit of a close encounter with George and George Martin, strangely enough. But I never got to speak to John. That would have been interesting, of course. Hugely influential, the Beatles. I mean, they changed the world, for God's sake.
Yeah, there's behind me is indeed, and coming from Steve Hackett on that end, on a musical end, a picture of in our studio, and a very large one of the Beatles and When They're Crossing Abbey Road is what we have right here in the studio, right behind us. So pretty stellar things. There we can get to a solo career, but it all started with you early on in South Central London, and of course being able to play other instruments. I mean, you had that interest and went on where you started. You put out actually even an ad and an advertisement back in the 70s too, searching for a new band, which is interesting.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I it was actually 5 years of ads in the back of that magazine,
wow.
And it's a little bit like Harvey Keitel, his story of trying to get even to be able to study at the Actors Studio. It took him 10 years before they would admit him, and so I guess I might have been advertising for 10 years, or maybe I'd still be advertising. Now, that magazine doesn't exist anymore. the band that I eventually joined, Genesis, doesn't exist anymore. At least at the moment, it doesn't. All potential reformations put to one side, and it's unlikely. Of course, I'm always up for that, but I still honor the early music that we did together, which I think is the important thing for me, because I think it was well written, and it still fires me up.
Oh my gosh, I did a bunch of music from your colleagues, from Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins, and also the band with all of you guys, Genesis. We featured that throughout the course of the show today, and with what you said there, there's been talk. I mean, this goes back now a whole bunch of years, and again, on board with Steve Hackett, ladies and gentlemen. Those of you who might just be joining us, Steve Hackett of Genesis. A musical supergroup, but there was talk quite a few years ago about getting together, but then not so much. I mean, man, how cool would it be? I mean, is there a stumbling block somewhere, Steve, that, even though Phil retired in, I think, somewhere around 2010 or 2011, but is there, you don't think it'll ever happen?
Well, I don't know. All I can ever say is that I'm up for it. If they would like me to do it, that's fine. But you need everyone else to sanction that. So who knows? Maybe one day, but I wouldn't hold your breath.
Oh man, that's a bummer. And I mean, and it is what it is. And it's whoever coined that phrase, "It is what it is exactly what it is. And but boy, it would be. It would be certainly stellar. I mean, it would be absolutely amazing, I think. A couple of things coming in from even our listeners and from our fans that are hanging out with us. Scheduling a South American tour soon. Is it possible with maybe that reunion Argentinian tribute band Genetics?
Well, I did play with them once or twice, but I have my own band, and so the last few times I've been to South America, it's been with my own band, who I like to think that they're extraordinary, with Craig Blundell on drums, who's on the front page of so many drumming magazines. He's very, very hot right now. And Jonas Reingold, who plays with several bands, including the Flower Kings, and they're just a brilliant band. Rob Townsend on saxes and flutes, Roger King on keyboards, and Nad Silvan, who's also the second Swede in the band. He's a Swedish-American and does a great job of all the Genesis songs. So it's nice to be able to do that, but it's nice to be able to do solo stuff as well, as the solo things have been selling more in recent years. The last thing I did got into the charts in 12 different countries, so I was having a bigger solo success than I'd ever had before. Of course, all of it gets overshadowed by the Genesis thing, because it's like trying to shadow box with this monster that Frankenstein's always going to be remembered for his monster. On the other hand, it's important to keep coming up with other inventions as well.
No, right. I agree, and shadowboxing is a great way to put it with the Genesis fame, which leads me to certainly kind of like a follow-up question here with that, just with Genesis. Then we want to focus on the solo career and things that Steve Hackett is doing, which, listen, I mean, you got the creme de la creme right here on board with Colossal Radio. Honored to have Steve Hackett of Genesis and an incredible solo career that's going on right now. But speaking of Genesis, when you were all part of that group, I mean, did you ever see this band becoming like a pop music group instead of the like this fabulous progressive band that you were?
Well, I think there's that, isn't there? Well, you mentioned pop music. First of all, I didn't use that term because I get into hot water with that. But I think it seems to be as if the history of the band was split into two halves. You've got the 70s version and the 80s version.
Yeah.
I think you've got the MTV approved 80s version, which is kind of singles based, and you've got the 70s John Lennon approved version. which was all about what we now call progressive, but basically it was albums that were journeys and things that were full of surprise. And both of them, I think, have got something to offer. Of course, I was involved with the earlier version, there'll be people out there who don't realize that Peter Gabriel was the lead singer with Genesis, and
right.
Oh, I never knew that. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
It depends what you're, how tuned into music you are, and how far you want to go uncovering those kind of Dead Sea Scrolls. You know what I mean?
Like I said, obviously I knew Peter Gabriel was a lead, but you know what else I found really interesting on your end, that you never sung a lead role or even backing vocals on a Genesis song. Is that true? Is that a true statement that our guys found here on the team?
I'll tell you what, I did actually sing backing vocals on one of them, but at the time I didn't want to credit, to be honest.
Okay.
I just kind of kept my head down at that time because it was a very competitive group, and I think I would have been embarrassed to let out that information. But since then, I've sung a ton of lead vocals, but I don't think I'm a Genesis singer. That voice that Pete has and that voice that Phil has. There's something about the great British rock voice that is, it's different. It's different to mine. Mine's more of a kind of ballad voice in a way.
I agree. And you can tell even by the way you speak now. But I'll tell you, it kind of like I said, when I saw that, it's like interesting. But then interesting to know your take and keeping your head down and onto the strings. You know what I found interesting too, and the guys did, and I said I didn't know that. And an early proponent of, and now we'll transition off into, certainly the solo stuff and some great shows. And right here in the Lehigh Valley, the incomparable, legendary, by all means, Steve Hackett coming to Allentown. We'll tell you more about that next month. But something that the guys found that are kind of like musically inclined here at the studio, an early proponent of guitar tapping, which was a technique that Eddie Van Halen did. And, you started throwing that in. Was that early or mid-career, or where'd that come from?
Oh, no, that starts in 1971 for me, when I first joined the band. Mm-hmm. And luckily, many people have acknowledged the influence. It's quite surprising, at times. Sometimes you get to work with people who have amazing technique themselves, and sometimes they'll say, stunningly, "Oh, I really like what you did on such and such a record." And
right.
I got to work with some extraordinary guitarists, such as Brian May, and John Paul Jones of Zeppelin, and it's always nice when someone likes what you do.
Yeah.
A fellow professional. Also, I did some stuff in Japan with Paul Gilbert and Nuno Bettencourt, all of whom are phenomenal guitarists. Sometimes we have those kind of playoffs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. And does any one of them that you met? And let's face it, I mean, you've played and run into just about everybody in the in our musical world, our rock and roll world, if you will. And music is so advantageous for all of us, no matter what style of music you like. If we didn't have it, where would we be? But is there one thing that sticks out in Steve Hackett of Genesis and an incredible solo career with guys that you did work with, like you mentioned, Eddie Van Halen, the Led Zeppelin guys? Any one in particular at all that you could single out?
Well, this might sound strange, but I don't know if you remember the violinist Yehudi Menuhin, fine classical player, extraordinary guy, spoke so many languages, really learned guy, been a child prodigy. Well, I remember seeing him on TV, and John Lennon was on, and they were having an argument together. And the funny thing is, Lennon liked something that I did, which was selling England by the pound. It seems as if Yehudi Menuhin liked something that I did because he used a piece I wrote on a film that he was making about British gardens, and I thought, well, these guys have been arguing, but they seem to agree on something, and without knowing, they've conferred about something. So I had their attention, even for a few seconds, and that's where I think I come in. I got huge respect for both of them. No longer with us, arguably both in spirit. But that's important for me. It's never been about the gold albums or the hit records or any of that stuff. It's did you get through to people, and is it possible that people that have been your heroes, that you might also get the nod from, the mark of respect? So that's important to me.
You know what's really interesting here, and so many of you people in this realm, where certainly you have done very, very, very well for yourselves, certainly monetarily, and being able to see the entire world, and it's certainly a job. We talked about this, Steve, before we went on the air, a job, but so many of you, and you don't hear this side. And like I said, I love the realness of it all, that you're so humble, no matter what it is, and grateful, and being able to give back, that is more important than anything else. And that is a message that I try to convey with this station. I've been very well blessed. I've had a great ride in 30 plus years, but to be able to give back and make people feel as if they are part of something, whether it be this radio station, whether it be seeing Steve Hackett on stage, you're just you're very grateful and very humbling, and that's just a tremendous message.
Yeah, I think it's the right way to go. Do you know what I mean? I think if you really want to do better each time, better and better work, unless you admit there's room for improvement, how are you going to do that?
Yep, totally agree.
It's a tough one for me because I think the last album I made, which is At the Edge of Light, I think it's probably the best thing I've ever done. And I'm thinking, well, if I can do something of that standard, that'll be good. But subject matter is the big challenge. It's like, what haven't you done with that? Because we had 20 people on it from all over the world, and from India, from Azerbaijan, from instruments from all over the United States, the McBroom sisters who worked with Pink Floyd, and just incredible, jazz people from different improvising traditions, because there's so many ways to do that. It's not just jazz that improvises.
Right.
Middle Eastern jazz, they have this style called mugam, and that's hugely interesting. And then you've got the kind of Jewish jazz, which is klezmer. It's so many different schools, and I think you have to be good to be able to do it. So I'm lucky to work with virtuosos and have them thrill me.
Yeah, it's amazing that you bring up jazz as well. And I often refer to this guy who was from right here from Lehighton, Pennsylvania. Again, on board with Colossal Radio, it is Steve Hackett. Certainly of Genesis fame, but an incredible solo career. But I often talk about this guy who's right here from Lehighton, Pennsylvania, by the name of Denny Seiwell, who was a drummer for Paul McCartney on the Wings album when it first came out, and
really
a personal friend of our family, Denny Seiwell, now residing in L.A. and has been on this show and many other shows that I've done in the past, and just an elite drummer. As you are an elite guitarist. But, the jazz thing comes into play so much with you guys. You look at somebody like Steve Hackett, who's on board with us right now, ripping into a guitar and playing, and yet, I don't know, you guys all dig jazz, man. So many people dig the jazz.
Yeah, I think there's that, it's the improvisation that comes from that, and then there's also, I think of something that I might call blue jazz. blues might have less chord changes and less harmony, but nonetheless, the amount of emotion that can come out of either the fingers of the player or the mouth of the singer or the harmonica player, to me, that's something I grew up listening to, and I'll get hugely moved by. And I realize a lot of progressive people don't really like it because there's not enough form in there for them. But then I keep thinking, I had this conversation with Robert Fripp at one point about form versus spirit, allowing room for improvisation, and thinking that it was hugely important to be able to do that, to walk away from the page, walk away from the score sheet, walk away from the plot, and allow things to happen. Let them happen spontaneously. Let them combust. Let them fail. Let them explode. Whatever. It's very important to be able to cut loose.
Yeah, I love it. I do that in life in general. That's for sure. The At the Edge of Light, latest album from Steve Hackett, and those of you that know Steve and the guys with Collins and Rutherford and Gabriel. Making up one hell of a supergroup in the day, most definitely called Genesis. But albums are available. You can find them online. Do the whole search. You can find Steve on Facebook, on a website as well. Let's talk a little bit about, and grateful for this interview again, Steve Hackett. We're talking one of the creme de la creme of rock and roll. On board here with us. We have the tour coming up, and here you are with dates in Canada and a U.S. tour. There is one right here at Miller Symphony Hall in Allentown, PA, right here in the Lehigh Valley, even getting into Harrisburg as well, guys, on March 15th at the Whitaker Center. What can we expect? Let's talk a little bit about Steve Hackett and this tour.
Well, I'm doing the whole of Selling England by the Pound. I'll also be doing selections from Spectral Mornings and Defector, which has its 40th anniversary this year.
Yeah.
Plus some stuff from At the Edge of Light, and the version of Selling England by the Pound also has one extra track that's written by Peter Gabriel and myself, which didn't make it onto the album, but it's in there like a deleted scene. Like a sort of director's cut version. Plus, we're going to do a couple of other Genesis classics, Watch of the Skies from Foxtrot, and the musical box from Nursery Crime, right back at the beginning of the 1970s. So I do all of that. It's a 3-hour show, very, very comprehensive show, but I think it's the strongest one I've ever been involved with. So I love doing it. I love being involved with the lights and the whole deal. The band are extraordinary.
Yeah, it's this is going to be a tour. You guys can, again, online. I don't have to beat websites and Facebook pages up to death. You're obviously online with an online radio station, so you got to be that smart that you're already listening to this interview. So get on board. Look for Steve Hackett online and Genesis Revisited. You'll see it. The tour dates and pretty amazing things that you've laid down and hit after hit. Albums are available online as well. I got to tell you though, and on a fun kind of end, but I have something in common with you, like I really do, and I've got people, even some of my team, that are on board now with voyeuring in on Facebook as well. I've got to say that I have one thing in common with you.
What is that?
I've been married 3 times as well. so that's all I can tell you.
I love the deadpan delivery before the coup de grace there. Yeah.
So all is good. Whatever. Life's life. It keeps moving forward. It's not stopping.
Well,
it's not stopping.
Yeah.
Not stopping.
Well, as my mother said, don't screw up again.
Yeah. You know what? My mother's here and still at 90 years old, and she said, she goes, listen, at least wait a little longer till you do it the next time around. It's like, oh boy, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about on a real end too with Steve's personal life, and only kidding, but it is true. I mean, I'm right there with you. But even going through some information that the team found, younger brother, family, even your son. Anybody else doing any kind of music in the family?
Well, my brother's involved with music, as I say. He plays flute, and he's a bit like me. He's got a rock band, but he also does classical albums, and he's 5 years younger than me. And I think in recent years he's kind of, in a way, it's a bit like he's redoubled his efforts. So he's producing a lot of stuff, and I get to work with him every album. There's usually something for flute, and so that's it's very nice that we get a chance to work together still.
Absolutely. Now, and where does Steve Hackett call home? Are we here in the States and over in England too?
Yeah, well, I tell you what. Whenever I am with my wife, I consider to be home, and but apart from that, and we do travel a lot. Really, home is just on the border of London, England. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'm talking from right now.
Very cool. Yeah. I could go on, and I know this gentleman's busy or has other things, or maybe not, and maybe just kicking back, going, you know what, I'm done for the day. Your PR people were absolutely incredibly awesome to deal with my publicist here. I mean, they have been absolutely incredible. So kudos go out to Chipster, the PR and consulting.
Yeah, I think
firm.
He's great. I really do. I'm supposed to do another one on the half hour, of course. So but been great talking to you so far. So,
it's just I just try to bring out the realness and just talk a little bit. And like I said, I don't do any of the staged questions. There was a couple of them here that we wanted to ask, but I'd rather just give people a real feeling. You did just that. It is Steve Hackett with, certainly still and always will be shadowboxing with Genesis, but what a hell of a band they all were. I could only hope for a reunion. Will it happen? I don't know. Even Steve, don't know. Unlikely, maybe, but the memories were made by you guys and incredibly good. This tour that is coming up, find Steve on board because it's certainly going to be one that you're not going to want to miss. And it will be the Selling England by the Pound tour, hitting right here in Pennsylvania, Allentown and Harrisburg. So, Steve, I could say my goodbyes real quick off the air. If you can give me just one more second. I know you have another interview coming up here in about a minute. All right, good deal. Steve Hackett, thank you very much.
Thank you. Been great talking to you.
Lehighton, Palmerton, Gemthorpe, and nationwide. It's Colossal Radio. Find us online at colossalradio.rocks.